It was the year 2000. We survived Y2K, Google wasn't even 2 years old yet, and college kids were just finding out about Napster. Meanwhile, most people were still using Windows 95, which was the style at the time. The Millennium was going to fix that, and today I have 5 PCs from that bygone era. The Gateway Solo 9300. They're all Pentium 3 machines with varying specs, however I won't be performing any benchmarks today, so that won't really matter. I will, however, be focusing on ease of use for the average layman based on the grandma factor. That being, would you consider giving this to an elder family member knowing full well that you are their only source for tech support? First up is this PC running Windows 98 2nd Edition. But wait, isn't that from 1998? Yes and no. The SE came into existence as a placeholder for Microsoft to add relevant features that were gaining in popularity, such as DVD support, internet connection sharing, and better USB compatibility. It came out on May 5th, 1999, and continued to be Microsoft's flagship consumer-facing product until it was replaced by Windows ME Millennium Edition. Now I'm going to quickly end this because I don't know if this is copyright protected music or not, so let's just close out of this now. So quick look at Windows 98 on this machine. This is basically one of my parts machines. It's not in the best condition, but I was able to get it to boot for this video, which is very surprising. The USB is broken on this thing. Let me see if I can plug in here and if it recognizes or not. So I basically have to hold it in right there because it's missing the little plastic piece in the center. Now when you try to plug in a USB device to this thing, it's going to ask for drivers. Just a basic thumb drive won't even install in 98 SE. Now you can do this if you have the USB 2 drivers, and then you can actually do this. So it's a couple extra steps after you do a clean install, and then you can get it running. That is basically one of the things that Windows ME fixed, Windows 2000 as well. You can plug and play regular thumb drives. They show up as an external disk. So this is one of the reasons why 98 was limping into the Millennium. Aside from that, it's your standard Windows 98 experience. Windows Update and stuff like that ran just fine back in the day. And yeah, there's not much to say about this. If you don't know what Windows 98 is by now, you don't need me explaining it. Now, of course, I can't talk about operating systems of the year 2000 and not bring up the one named after said year. Windows 2000 was a long overdue replacement for Windows NT 4 that was a breath of fresh air. It was released in early 2000 on February 17th. It was truly where Microsoft was heading in the future, as much of the look and feel continued with Windows XP and beyond. Being an NT-based system, it had much better network and file security in place that businesses would require. It was later replaced by Windows XP Professional and had an end-of-life support that went through the decade, ending on July 13th, 2010. Now this is my Solo 9300 XL. I actually ordered it from a guy in England and had it shipped here. So it's got the UK keyboard. It's the exact same model I had, aside from being a US version, back when I worked for Gateway and bought one through the employee purchase program. It has Windows 2000 on it, Professional, and the great thing about this is that it just works. All the drivers are loaded. I didn't have to fight anything to get everything working. It has Legacy Update installed, which is something I recommend anyone running older operating systems gets installed on their system, mainly because it gives you a chance to get your system as far as up to date as it can. It'll get rid of any bugs that you might have, any wide open security vulnerabilities that you don't want on your system, and it just gives you a slight peace of mind even though all your updates are 10 to 15 years out of date. The last update for this came out in 2010 when Microsoft finally ended support for it. So yeah, I wouldn't keep this thing on the internet too long without proper firewalls. Yeah, aside from that, this is the one I'm keeping. I'm never going to sell this one as long as I can keep it running. It's got half a gig of RAM. It's got an SSD in there, the actual ATA IDE SSD. That thing is so fast. It has an LS120 drive. It has a DVD burner as well that I upgraded. It doesn't quite look that original, obviously, but it does fit. And if I ever wanted the exact look and feel for the old style, if I was taking, fancy photos of this thing, then I would put the old drive back in just so it would look original. The other thing about having proper software support is that all the buttons work. When you upgrade this thing to XP, you start finding issues where you just don't have proper support for every driver. I was getting problems with the ATI drivers. This thing has video input as well, so I can record video on this thing if I had if I wanted to do an old Apple II and get the video input recorded. This will do it, and that's something that, for a 24-year-old laptop, I can still use it today to make YouTube videos reliably. Is pretty crazy. So let me just shut it down. Now, on the side of this thing, you've got the two PCMCIA slots. You've got FireWire, which is great if you have to transfer any large files, because the USB next to it there is god-awful slow. It does have a network adapter, a 10100 network adapter, and a modem, and your standard audio ports. It's a great laptop. It's in pristine condition. On the back here, you've got the printer port, serial port, composite in and out, VGA, and digital audio. This thing was made for production back in the early 2000s. Now right there you also have the dock port, and the dock allows you to actually install an entire PCI card. So this thing is practically a desktop replacement for its time. On the bottom here I do have open battery. It's not the safest thing in the world. I am very careful about where I set this thing down. I do have to 3D print a proper case for this thing. Now, when I did this battery repack, I'm still using the other half of the case that's in there right now, but the batteries were just a hair bigger than the originals, and I couldn't get the case to fit properly back together. So I'm going to 3D print one after I learn how to 3D model, and that's something that's going to take a while. But I'm very happy that I was able to repack a battery and safely do it. I didn't have any fires, no arcing, no sparks, and it all came out pretty good. As you can see, the battery holds a full charge, which is great, and it actually lasts a very long time considering that there's no moving parts in this thing aside from the fan and the CD-ROM. Once you get rid of a hard drive, that's a lot of your power consumption right there. Next up is Windows ME. Windows ME was released late in 2000 on September 14th. To persuade users of Windows 98, Microsoft offered a limited time offer to upgrade for $59.95 instead of the regular price of $109. However, even with this incentive, few users made the switch. Lack of driver support, system crashes, and a plethora of other issues kept many users sticking to Windows 98. Having Windows 2000 come out earlier in the year also made Windows ME feel like an obsolete OS at delivery. A short 13 months later, Windows XP arrived, which started the pattern of poorly received OSs such as Vista and Windows 8, followed by good OSs like Windows 7 and 10. Now this Windows ME machine is normally running Windows 98. I threw ME on there just so that I could make this video. Once I'm done with the video, I'm going to throw 98 back on there. I was never a fan of Windows ME. It's not that it's a bad operating system anymore. I mean, after years of updates, Microsoft really fixed a lot of the fatal flaws that it had at delivery. So it's still a good operating system. The great thing that I do like about Windows ME is that you can just plug in a thumb drive that you can't do that on 98. So it's going to show that it's installing the USB mass storage device, and it just pops right up and it works, which is great. So I'm going to open that up. I'm not sure if that's formatted or not. It might not be, but you're going to see it pop up in a second here. Okay, here we go. So it finally popped up at the speed of USB 1. And yeah, nothing major on here, just some files that I keep around for a lot of the stuff I do on these old computers. This is a FAT32 format, so that I can use it on the old Macs I got. I can use it on my PCs, and yeah, it's pretty nice just to have the option of using a thumb drive. It was something that I'm surprised we didn't see coming earlier. Now this machine I'm also gonna keep. I'm not. This is one I'm not getting rid of. It's got 288 mega RAM. It's got an 800 megahertz processor. It doesn't say it in here for some reason, but when you go into the BIOS, that's what it does say. And this is in great shape. I do think I'm going to have to replace the monitor eventually because it's got a red hue when it first boots up, and eventually as it warms up, that goes away. It's really not a concern right now. I do have a spare monitor because I was restoring these things for a minute, and that's why I've got so many of them, because I was just restoring them and using the others for parts, because when you order these things on eBay, usually they come to you destroyed. Unless somebody packs it very carefully and overdoes it on the packing material, you're going to get it cracked. The plastics on these things are very old and brittle, and if you're expecting the UPS or FedEx man not to throw this thing at your door, good luck. So I'm going to shut it down, and let's see if this one has a sound. No, they did away with that. Like Windows 95 might have been the last Windows operating system that had a shutdown sound. Now, I always thought it was odd that it still says it's now safe to shut down your computer, and the other operating systems don't say that. It's only this one, so it might be this particular laptop. I don't know. So that's 3 Windows operating systems that were in use in the year 2000. Now, what are these other 2? Well, Linux, of course. In fact, my very first introduction to Linux was in the year 2000 because I had just purchased one of these Gateway Solo 9300s, and it was supposed to have Windows 98 SE installed. When I got it, it had Windows ME installed, and I wasn't very happy about that. So I started looking into Linux. Linux Mandrake, to be exact. Mandrake 7.0 was released in mid-2000 as an insert in Maximum Linux magazine. It was also available for download later on. It was the Ubuntu of their time and a very easy switch for those interested in an open source OS. However, in my case, I had an issue getting it to work with my network adapter, and being new to Linux, I gave up and tried some other distros. I did go back several times with each new release, and eventually I got bored by the time they renamed them Mandriva. Now the problem with this one is that the display is a little flaky. I took it apart, I reseated the cable, and it actually worked for quite a while, and then it stopped. So, I don't know if it's the ribbon cable between the display and the motherboard inside here, or what it could be. It still works, it's just the display is very flaky, and I do have that other display I was talking about. I might install it in here to just see if it fixes it, but I'm thinking it's in the actual ribbon cable that's in here, and I don't believe I have a spare ribbon cable. I have to dig into my garage, and I do have one that I got from a Goodwill purchase online, and it came shattered in pieces, and I recovered what parts I could off of that because they just refunded me the money and they didn't expect me to ship it back. So that is something I might dig into and repair, and maybe I'll make a video about it. Now, one thing about Mandrake, which I find kind of confusing for a Linux distro, is that you don't need a password. You can just set root and user passwords as blank. And, it's not very secure. I'm not sure you could do that today, but maybe you can. I never really tried not to use a password until I started doing these videos because just for ease of use. Now, you have a lot of desktop environments here, and I personally don't like any of them. I think it was kind of like an overload. You don't need this many. Stick with KDE, stick with GNOME. That's how it is pronounced if you're just following along for the first time. It's a little bit too many, but it's fine. I like having options, And you don't have to use them. You don't even have to install them all. I just did a default install on this. And let's see how it goes. Now, you may think that I don't like Mandrake because of how I described it in the last section of the video. Now, honestly, I loved it. I was all gung-ho about getting into Linux, open source software, just getting out of the Microsoft environment. And I tried so hard, but I just didn't have the skill or knowledge back then, or so much even the ability, because if you don't have a network adapter, it's the year 2000. I didn't have thumb drive on me. I didn't have a lot of the things that would have made it easier of just like going to a website, downloading the driver, and getting it to work. Now, I didn't know about offline installers. Everything I knew about installing missing drivers was basically searching the internet, searching Yahoo back then, and downloading distros. But if you don't have a network adapter, you're stuck. And I didn't have the knowledge back then to fix it. And because I was trying other distros at the time too, that's why I went with something else at the time. Now, Mandrake really does have a special place in my heart because it was my very first Linux distro that I ever tried, and I did keep going back every time they had a new update. And then they changed the name to Mandriva because they got sued by a comic book company because Mandrake the Magician, they said they didn't want it confused with Mandrake software. So they changed it to Mandrake Linux, and eventually they bought a company, I believe, called Captiva, a Brazilian distro, and they combined the names to Mandriva. They lasted until about 2010, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. And it's a shame they went the way of the dodo, but with other distros like Ubuntu, Pop OS, CentOS, there's so many now that back then there was only a handful that people were using or could use. And I forgot how hard it was to install Linux on this old 24-year-old distro because I am so used to the newer installers where it's so automated and you really don't need to be a computer genius to do it. Now, this old thing, I had trouble with video resolution. I had trouble getting the graphics drivers to work at first, and it brought me back to those days of what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Why Mandrake? But I got it up. I didn't give up this time. And if it was on a better computer, I might have a better experience. Now, I did try this on my larger 15.7 inch that I have Windows 2000 on right now, and I could not get the graphics to work at that resolution. I tried every combination that I could think of, and I just didn't get it. And honestly, I'm just making a video. I'm not doing this as a daily driver, and I can't waste any more time trying to get Mandrake to work for me. I do love it. I wish it stayed around, and it didn't. That's the way a lot of this old software goes. It fades away, and that's why I want to highlight it on my channel here. It came with Netscape. This is back before Firefox. And the other thing I really liked about Linux back then was that you can have multiple desktops. So let's say, you got a browser open here. You can open this up, open up Calculator. You got, multiple desktops, which it's commonplace now, but back then it wasn't. And if you're just using Windows 95, Windows 98, and then you come into this, and it's like, wow, this is really amazing. I wish it just worked. And unfortunately, it didn't for a lot of people. And that's why even today, Linux hasn't taken off in the mainstream as much as it should. It's definitely doing better, I believe. We use it where I work, on everything, just about. And I'm much better at it now than I was back then. And I'm happy that it is getting more widespread use. So I'm going to shut this one down and we will go to the next. Okay, I do like that it says, hey, by the way, you do have unsaved stuff open. Are you sure you want to shut down? Yes, I'll shut down. And you can see more of that screen artifacting. I do like that you see Tux right there at the end as you log out. Now, Red Hat Linux 7.0 was a much easier install in my case.
It was released on my birthday, September 25th, 2000, and because of a much larger user base, all of my drivers were supported. I would go back and forth with Red Hat and Windows mainly because I needed support for certain Windows programs that I couldn't use with Linux at the time. It was, however, fairly easy to switch between drives as these Solo 9300s support 2 internal hard drives. The following year, Red Hat 7.1 came out and replaced 7.
Now, I like how that shows a little guy all by himself with a red hat, separating himself from the crowd. Of course, my battery is low. It doesn't exist. Now, Red Hat was great for me back in 2000 because this was the one Linux distro that I could get working on my laptop. That was the biggest problem back then, was driver support, and there was enough people out there using Red Hat where just by default almost everything worked. Now, not everything, of course, but quite a bit of stuff, so it was very, very easy to get into. When I had to, I could switch back to Windows back and forth. And this is where I learned more about Linux back in the day. And then I just continued throughout the years, a little bit here and there. I always went back and forth. And it wasn't until I started working over 10 years ago, I started working more software than hardware. And I just started using Linux on a more regular basis. Before it was more of a hobbyist, and now it's my job. So I am very happy that I got into this back when I did, because I might not be where I'm at today, just for the fact that if I didn't know this, I might have not had the right job interview at the time. And yeah, it's the little things in life that can really change everything in the future. And this is a quick little look around Linux Red Hat. Now, if you wanted to see a much more detailed video, there's plenty out there. I am just showing a quick slideshow of the year 2000. Once again, it came with Netscape Navigator. That was the non-Microsoft web browser of the time. Now, unfortunately, all these links are gone. Those servers don't exist anymore. I'm sure you can find them on the archive, and there's plenty of material out there. You can get old books, you can download books that will tell you everything you need to know about running these old OSs. But Red Hat Linux really was the one that worked for me the most. And instead of saying shut down, this one says halt. Just the little differences there.
Now, there's one more operating system that came out in the year 2000 that may surprise you. For starters, it won't run on any of these laptops I have in front of me, except this one. Okay, so I found out the max amount of laptops that I can fit on this desk and still be in frame. So here we are. Mac OS X public beta came out on September 13th, 2000. It was very limited as it was still in development. However, it was a massive change that Mac OS needed. Classic Mac OS was starting to feel dated, and Apple needed something that would easily convert Windows users. It would eventually be succeeded by the full version of Mac OS X, Cheetah, in 2001. Apple charged early users $29.95 for the beta and offered a $30 discount for the full release when it arrived. The beta was set to expire on May 14th, 2001. Anyone who wants to install it today would need to do so on hardware that was available at that time. You also need to set your system clock within those dates as well, or else it won't boot.
Now, Mac OS X public beta, it didn't have a lot going for it other than just the wow factor. So everyone that was using 9.2 up until this point was very familiar with the older style classic Mac OS. Now, I love classic Mac OS, but in the year 2000, it felt a lot like it was Windows 3.1. It was a very clunky feeling OS when the world was definitely going to the stuff with smoother lines, just a better GUI, graphic user interface overall. And that's where this really shined, because coming from the old Mac OS to this, it was night and day. It was very similar to what people think of Linux at the time. And it really cleaned up the whole user interface. So on this PowerBook, I usually use 9.22 on here, and I deleted that just so I could install this for the video. and I really like it. There's not much I can do because I don't have a lot of applications for it, but it's something that, for the time being, it was neat to look into. It is time locked, so after I forget the date off the top of my head. I know I said it earlier in the video, but I don't have my notes in front of me because I'm filming this on the fly. Now, if you're familiar with Mac OS X, obviously this looks a little different, as they all do as they update. There's always little changes, but this one still has the shutdown is under special, similar to classic Mac OS. About this Mac really doesn't show you anything other than the basic, 1 gig PowerPC G3. Now, I am in the utilities here, and you see it's got terminal. That was not in 9.2 or any prior version of Mac OS, and that's very handy, especially if you're familiar with Linux. You kind of get used to having a command line interface where they tried to do away with that for a long time, and you just need it. Now, one thing I am being careful not to do is connect this to the internet because it will get updated time. I would have to turn that off. But I'm not worried about that. After this video, I'm just going to nuke it and go back to 922 on this MacBook. Okay, there is the system profiler. I couldn't find that before because I'm blind. Now, if you're familiar with the system profiler in new versions of macOS, this looks completely different. This still uses the old GUI from classic macOS, the same tree drop down for the hardware info. Another thing this had, this was before iTunes came out. It was a CD MP3 player, very basic. This is before the iTunes app came out. Like I said, this is before everything Apple was known for in the early 2000s. Now, I am going to go ahead and break it. I'm going to put in a date much later than the beta. So this should make it January 1st, 2019, and this will definitely break the beta. This will tell me that the beta has expired. Okay, I forgot about this. I'm going to show you something very funny. I am going to sudo date command. So this will tell me that I am not in the sudoers file, and the incident will be reported. To who? I don't know. If I do log in as sudo, you can't see anything. It doesn't tell you anything, so I thought that was funny. Now, it does end your terminal session, though. So you do have to start a new one. Now, all you have to do is su tac, end your password, and now you're root. It was that simple. Now I can run the date command, 01/01/19, 0600, and enter. So now I just set the time. Oh, wait. So let's make it September. That'll definitely kill it. So now it's September 19th, 2001. This is well beyond the use of the beta. Okay, logging back in, I believe it would kill it. Yeah, there you go. This beta release of macOS has expired. So I basically broke it. The data is still there. You can access it if you were to install a newer operating system, or I believe you can go back to OS 9. I'm not worried about my data. I'm just going to wipe it. But the way around this, so let's say you install Mac OS X public beta, and you forget to change your clock ahead of time. So you can't do it with the installer. You have to use a later installer. So I have a Tiger installer that I used. I opened up the terminal window and I just renamed, or I reset the date to a date within that window. And that fixes it. You don't have to reinstall anything. All you have to do is change the clock. It's pretty simple.
I hope you enjoyed this walk through memory lane as much as I enjoyed making it. Now, if you like this content, feel free to like, subscribe, and leave comments because it really does help with the YouTube algorithm. I love doing this stuff. It is a great hobby of mine. As you can see, I've got quite the problem collection. I've got quite the collection, and I love doing this. So I hope I get better. I hope I'm taking constructive criticism. Let me know where I need to improve. Every time I do this, I feel like I'm getting better, and I really hope that's where this is going. So like, subscribe, comment, keep it going, keep it rolling, and I'll see you in the next one. The next one I do plan on doing is a new battery pack for this Pismo. I'm really hoping I can get that done in a short period of time. I still have to order the batteries. I still have to find out the exact size of batteries, and that stuff I'll go into on that next video. Stay tuned.